Well, good evening. We turn again to Nehemiah in the chapter 2, and we're going to, hopefully, God willing, finish this chapter this evening. And I just want to answer a question I've been asked in this last number of days. Somebody has asked why I'm not doing perhaps devotional thoughts or studying the Psalms. And I want to just give you my heart on the matter, for as we come to consider the Word of God, I truly believe that even in times of great challenge, times of great difficulty, that we must know what it is to encourage ourselves in the Lord. And therefore we don't come to the Bible like a vending machine, put our pound in and hope to get something good out. No, we're seeking to establish a firm foundation that both for the days today, for tomorrow, for the months and years ahead in the will of the Lord, that we will have a firm foundation consistently upon which we can build and increase our faith and know what it is to gain help and the strength of the Lord to make it through the challenges as they come our way. And so this consistent pattern of Bible study, just continuing our thoughts in the Word of the Lord as the Lord has led us to it, is, I believe, the best way to ensure a well-grounded, a well-rounded, and indeed a vibrant Christian life and that close fellowship with God Himself. And I trust that as we spend these times together, that they are that encouragement to you, and that truly the Lord is ministering to your heart even through His Word. We're come to Nehemiah in the chapter 2. We're going to read together again from the verse 17, and it says, "Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and said, What is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, He will prosper us. Therefore we, His servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem." And as we come to consider these verses together once again, I want us to notice first of all the togetherness of the people. The togetherness of the people. There they were assembled around Nehemiah as he began to share all that the Lord had put upon his heart, and indeed the burden that the Lord had placed upon his life, to see this physical rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem that spoke directly even to that spiritual rebuilding that he wished to see effected in the lives of those people. Remember, he was a man who was concerned with the spiritual well-being of the people of Judah. He was a man who asked, first of all, after the condition and indeed the heart of the people of Judah. And yes, as he came to Jerusalem to engage in this work of rebuilding, it was to see those walls rebuilt up in a spiritual sense, to see those gates rehung in a spiritual sense, to see the people reactivated and re-engaged in true worship for God and true service for God, even in their generation. And so this servant of God, he gathered the people around him. He shared with them the burden that the Lord had placed upon his heart. And remember, last night we said he didn't mince his words. He didn't try to paper over the cracks. No, he gave a clear assessment of the times that he found himself in. There were days of devastation. Days whenever the physical structure of Jerusalem was crumbled, but days in which he also identified that the spiritual condition of the people was not what it should be, and therefore he wished that together that they might rise up and that they might build and see that rebuilding for the Lord. Now notice, even as he speaks to the people, he says, "Ye see the distress that we are in." He was including himself in that. He didn't seek to come with a message to those people saying that he was on a higher plane than they were, that he was in a better condition than they were. No, he was speaking directly even to each one that was gathered, to his own heart and to the hearts of those who were before him. And then he continues and he says, "Let us build up the wall of Jerusalem. Let us together come and work and put our hand to that work of seeing the physical walls rebuilded, but also that spiritual reviving of our hearts, that reinstitution of true worship, true service for God." The people then respond, and they say at the end of verse 18, "Let us rise up and build." Remember last night we said that these were a people who identified that this was a work worth doing. It wasn't because Nehemiah wished to see something done. It wasn't because they themselves wished to see something done for themselves. No, they recognized that it was for the good of the people as a whole. And therefore they banded together. They heeded the exhortation, let us rise up and build. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. This is our condition. This is verses. This is a testimony that speaks very clearly to the condition of my heart, of your heart, of our heart, even as God looks down upon us. And that's the message for today. Remember last night we said we must be honest about our own condition before God. We must, as a church, be honest about our own condition before God. We must admit before God that we're not content, we're not happy with the way things have been going, with the way things are going. No, we must be clear before God that there is work to be done, and that together that we might see that work accomplished. This was a people who were not interested in a one-man ministry. This was a people who were not interested in building personal kingdoms for themselves. This was a people who were willing to band together and to do what was required to see the work of God go forward. That's why they with one voice rose up and said, let us rise up and build. You see, at the end of verse 18, they strengthened their hands for this good work. It's an identification again that this is a work of God. That as they viewed even the words of Nehemiah and indeed weighed them up in their own hearts and their own minds, that they could see that this was a good work, something worth doing, something that needed to be done. And they strengthened their own hands for that. I hear very often those who say that they do not know what they could do to help the work of God, that they feel limited or inhibited because of their own abilities or because of their age or because of their own circumstances. And they say, sure, what can I do? But each of these people here strengthened their hands for this good work. And I believe this with all of my heart, that if you're one who says, sure, what can I do? What can I offer to the service of God, to the work of God here at our church in Grange, in this wider area? What can I do? That's not the question that we should be asking. That's not how we should be coming to our own personal reflection on this challenge that is issued from the Word of God. Indeed, to this need that is right before our eyes to see a rebuilding work here accomplished to the glory and to the honour of God. No, we must first of all resolve in our hearts that whatever it takes and whatever God asks us to do, that we will say yes. I'll say yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. I'll say yes, Lord, yes. I will trust you and obey. If your Spirit says to come, then I'll willingly follow on. I'll say yes, Lord, yes, to your will. Are you willing to say yes tonight? Don't use the circumstances of today as an excuse not to be engaged in doing something worthwhile for God. Don't use this period of isolation and say, sure, what can I do? I'm not even allowed to go to the church. Find something now to do, to be engaged in this rebuilding work for God. To see the saints encouraged, to see the sinners even brought to that realization of their need of a Saviour, to see the work of God go forward. Strengthen your hand, because I guarantee you that whenever you strengthen your hand, whenever you make your heart willing and your will willing to follow after God, you will not be in any short supply for work to be engaged in. Not only did you have the togetherness of the people, but notice with me also in verse 19, the trouble to be faced. The trouble to be faced. The Bible tells us there, when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the servant, we were introduced to these two men in verse 10 of this chapter. Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite heard it. They were grieved exceedingly, the Bible tells us there. Remember, this was before anything had ever happened. This was before anything had fully even been revealed. There was simply a statement of intent. Nehemiah had travelled from Shushan to Jerusalem. He was on his way, and yes, there was that statement of intent with the supplies that he brought, and indeed the report that no doubt came ahead of him, that this was somebody somebody who wanted to do something and see something done, and they were grieved in their heart. But now, this burden Nehemiah reveals to the people and gives to the people. The Bible tells us here that when they heard it, they're joined by another, Geshem, the Arabian. They laughed us to scorn and despised us. Now, first of all, I want you to notice that this was a people who were within the people of God. Here they were assembled with the others as they heard Nehemiah speak. Now hold that in your mind, for in days to come we're going to notice something very different about these three men. But here they are at the beginning, found among that congregation of people as they gather together to consider the words of Nehemiah, to consider the burden that Nehemiah shared with them. The Bible tells us that these three men, they're of the servants, they're of the people of the Hornites, the people of the Ammonites, the Arabian. Some believe that the Arabian speaks of the descendants of Esau, the Ishmaelites, and therefore, remember we said when we mentioned these first two characters in the verse 10 of this chapter, that these personalities speak to us of the carnality, the worldly flesh that must be faced whenever a work for God is seeking to be done. These are the problems, the war of the flesh against the spirit that must be overcome in the individual's life, in the corporate life of a church. We must war against the flesh. We must war against the works of the devil. We must war against the schemes of this world. And here you find that present among the people of God that day were assembled three individuals that picture for us this worldly flesh, this carnality that must be overcome to see the work of God go forward. Many churches find, even within their numbers today, people who are simply carnal. Oh, perhaps they even take the name of being a believer. Perhaps they even take the name of being a Christian. But their words, their actions, their motives all speak of carnality. And therefore, amongst the people of God are found these individuals, amongst the people of God, no matter where we find ourselves on the face of this earth this night, there will be existing these battles, this trouble to be faced. See how it manifests itself. The Bible tells us they laughed us to scorn. There's mocking. Oh, they hear of a burden that the servant of God brings. They hear of the desire of his heart to see something done, something accomplished, something changed about the condition of Jerusalem. Remember, these walls have been cast down for many, many years. There have been barrenness, there have been dearth there in that city. It was no longer a city to marvel at. It was no longer a city even to be willing to come to and say, what a great place this is. No, this was a city that was desolate. It was destitute. And therefore, as they heard what Nehemiah shared with the people, let us build the wall of Jerusalem again, the Bible tells us they laughed to scorn. You'll always find those who are unwilling to believe that God can do something. Perhaps it's because of the scenario of the time, the reality of the circumstances. They looked around, they saw all the stones on the ground, they saw terrain that was so filled with rubble that even animals couldn't cross it. The place was in devastation, it was in utter chaos. And they think to themselves, what could be done there? But God is not bound by what you and I perceive, what you and I see, what you and I believe to be the reality. God is not bound, His work is not bound, His will is not bound. And you and I don't need to use where we find ourselves in the world or the circumstances we find ourselves in as a cause for disbelieving that God can do something, that God can accomplish something. We find ourselves in a country locality. We find ourselves in a rural location. But do you not believe that God can build a great work here to the glory of His name? And I'm not talking about simply a great work numerically. I'm talking about a great work spiritually. Could this not be a company of God's people who are spiritually strong, who are spiritually capable to face the challenges of life and to live consistently for Jesus Christ as a witness in this locality? Could God not do it? Or are you one who sits at home tonight and mocks, laughs, scoffs at the very idea that God could do anything here? The Bible tells us not only that they laughed them to scorn, but they despised us. That means they shunned them. That means they almost cut them off. They treated them as something to be avoided, something to be looked down on and sneered at. They despised the people of God. Why? Because remember, Nehemiah came and he's disturbed the comfortable, he disturbed the complacent, and this is how carnal people respond. The Bible tells us their words. It says, "What is this thing that ye do?" Hear the mocking, the sarcasm. You think that can be done? Who do you think you are? What kind of grand plan have you come all the way from 800 miles away with? What on earth do you think you're doing? This is Jerusalem. It's been a desolate city. It's been a city of devastation for all these years now, since the Babylonians came and ransacked it almost 150 years ago. And you think that something can be done? What's this thing that you think can be done? And they point to the highest authority. The highest authority. They say, "Will ye rebel against the king?" Oh, they sought to use the very laws of the land, the very fear of the king of the land, to be an inhibitor to the zeal of the people, to be an inhibitor to the desire of the people, to be an inhibitor to the willingness of the people to do something for God and to see enacted there God's will. They tried everything, sneered at them, despised them. Now they threaten them. Are you going to go against the king? But notice with me something very important. Remember, these three individuals picture to us a carnal individual, a carnal person. Somebody who is only ever able to respond in the flesh. They do not recognize even the working of the Spirit of God. They do not identify even the movement of the Spirit of God, the leading of the Spirit of God. They're carnal. They're carnal. And they responded with the very highest authority that they could, the king of the land. And notice Nehemiah. Nehemiah responds and says, "The God of heaven." He identifies a greater authority than the king of the land. He identifies a greater individual than the earthly king that he one day even stood before and served so faithfully, because he recognized, he identified that the work that he was involved in, it was a good work, but it was the work of God. And remember, the gates of hell itself shall not prevail against the work of God. And so don't be discouraged. Don't be downcast because of those who say it can't be done. Those who mock, those who scoff, those who seek to be inhibitors to the work of God. Say, this is a work for God. And by His grace, we will do it. The Bible tells us not only of the togetherness of the people, the trouble that must be faced, but then it gives to us also the trust of the servant of God. Remember, in his response, he identified the God of heaven. But look what he says. He says, He will prosper us. They hadn't even begun. They hadn't even begun to try to do the work that Nehemiah believed with all of his heart that God had called him to do. They hadn't even lifted a brick. They hadn't even lifted their tools. They hadn't even built the necessary ladders and scaffolding to be able to rebuild the walls. It hadn't even begun, but Nehemiah was confident in the God who called him, the God who commissioned him, and the God who had provided him exactly what he needed until this point. And he said, the God of heaven, He will prosper us. Therefore we, His servants, will arise and build, but ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Now here Nehemiah displays a remarkable ability to be able to discern even the trouble that was before him, and indeed the individuals who were behind the trouble. Because as he places his faith, his confidence, his trust in God, and remember, this is something that he has consistently done right throughout this book. He's come before the king with that great burden on his heart, but he's prayed for 4 months, and he's confident that God will open to him that door of opportunity, and in order that he might be able to see even the king respond in a favourable way. It's now led to him being here in the city of Jerusalem. He's walked the city by night. He's rode on his beast right throughout the city, and he's surveyed all that there is, and now he's assembled the people, and he's heard that favourable response to the people as they identify within him even the right motivation to go about the work of God, and the right cause to rally behind, get behind, to come together and to be engaged in. They've strengthened their hands, and now he says to those 3 individuals who are named here in Scripture as being those who oppose, he says to them, ye have no portion, ye have no right, you have no memorial in Jerusalem. Why? Because you're not truly the people of God. You're carnal. You're people of the flesh. You're people whose desires are in the flesh. You're people who live according to the flesh. And friend, tonight as we end this part of our Bible study, we're remarking upon the trust that Nehemiah had in the God of heaven. He could only have that trust because he was a child of God. Because he knew what it was to have a relationship with God. I wonder tonight, do you have a portion? Do you have an inheritance in the things of God? It might be the case that for many years you've even attended this church, been part of this church. But are you a carnal individual? Or are you one who responds to the Spirit of God? The carnal individual has no portion, no right, no memorial in the city of God, in the work of God. And that's the same for any who simply oppose the work of God because they cannot in and of themselves discern between the flesh and the spirit because they are yet carnal. Look, search your own heart. Try your own ways. Ensure that you are right in your relationship with God, because if you are right in your relationship with God, then you will be right in your relationship with others. And sadly, there are those who are not right in their relationship with others. And therefore, I'm telling you as your pastor that you cannot be right with God if you are not right in your relationship with others. And you have no right. You have no inheritance. You have no portion in the work of God here. Why? Because you are yet carnal. I pray that God will challenge us, that God will speak to our hearts, that God will help us to identify the good work that we must be engaged in, but that we will respond in the Spirit, not the flesh. We will respond in the Spirit and say, "Here, my Lord, I'm willing to do whatever Thou would have me to do. I strengthened my hands. I've made my will willing to follow after you. Now reveal to me that work that you would have me to be engaged in." There's work for you. There's something for you. Will you tonight respond to the Spirit of God? Will you hear the call of God? Will you move past yourself and surrender your entire will, your entire being to the work of God? I pray that you will. And I pray that tonight that many will even seek to make right those relationships that are not right. That many tonight will make right those relationships even with the leadership of this church. And I pray that God would have His own way in each of our hearts, in each of our homes, to the glory and to the honour of His name. God bless you.